Hi, Richard Little, your land partner. I'm going to be talking today about all aspects of development are crucial, but this is where we see most people get things wrong. So it's the appraisal process. This is the first session of more than 20 where we've been given a great deal of detail and information on appraisals. So even if you don't catch all of the rest of the 80 odd or 70 odd, these are the ones that everybody probably should be listening into, and perhaps listening to more than once, because as I say, even experienced people get this one wrong. So what I actually want to start it off with as way of an introduction is just to sort of go through the four areas of our appraisal process, and explain just a little bit about them, and every single one of them we're going to be going into more detail on a separate sessions. So appraisals. It depends who's talking about them and as to what they mean. So the appraisal process for us is a number of assessments. So the first stage is what we call initial assessment. The second stage is a planning assessment. Then our next one is high level numbers. Once you get more experience, you can switch the second stage planning assessment with the third stage, the high level numbers, and lastly, as an opportunity progresses through the sort of the pipeline, as it were, or sort of not the pipeline, it progresses through our processes. It's what we call a full development appraisal. So, what I'll start off with saying is a planning appraisal, a development appraisal, is not just about a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet is an absolute crucial part of an appraisal and the appraisal process, but that's where many people get it wrong, because they think the spreadsheet is it all. And we're going to tell you through these 20-25 sessions that it really isn't. The numbers have to be correct. We're going to give you some guidance on actually how we get those numbers correct, or correct in our estimation. But it's about a lot more than the numbers. So a little bit more detail on our four stages. So the initial assessment. So I'll talk relatively slowly, because some people probably at some point will make notes on this. It starts with, effectively, it's an 8-point checklist, if you like. And this isn't necessarily in the order of importance or anything else, but these are the 8 areas that we look at when something's on our desk. Now, we're pretty experienced. We don't look at all of them before we talk to landowners, etc. We'll often talk to landowners before we look at any of them. But now I'll say most of you shouldn't be doing that, so I probably shouldn't have told you that in the first place. So I'm giving you a shortcut that you probably don't need. So number one on the list is land registry. Making sure that you get the documents, etc., and you have a bit of an understanding. The second one is flood risk, and that's flood risk from rivers and seas, and also from surface water. As I say, every one of these points we're talking about will have an individual session to sort of show you exactly what we do and what we believe everybody should be doing, to be fair. We look at tree preservation orders, TPOs. That's a very interesting session that will be. We then look at access, so access onto and off a site. So how we actually look at, is it a suitable access? Can we get a suitable access? How we actually mitigate any risks on that? That's a big one. It's one of the very few out of these checklists that we use a traffic light system, so red, amber, green. It's one of the very few that can have a red, and a red means not possible, move on. So designation, that's effectively, this is when we're touching onto the planning side of things. So is that particular site designated for a particular use? Is it not designated? Is it greenbelt, brownfield, etc.? As I say, every one of these will have individual sessions on. Market history, we always have a little bit of a look if a site has market history, any market history. It's just about gaining information. Much more interesting for us, and probably most people listen to this, is does it have a planning history? So is there anything on record from year dot, from basically when records are been put online, etc. So what is the history on that? So that is very, very important. If there is a history, it's also important to know whether there's a history. And last but not least on our 8-point checklist is local restrictions. Now that's anything that's specific to a site. It could be, I don't know, a bus stop outside the site, or it could be overhead power lines or something. So anything that is actually local to that site or to adjacent sites. That pretty much is our initial assessment. Now, most of that is done from the desk. In fact, it's all done from the desk to a certain degree. So it's generally stuff that before anybody goes out and makes a site visit, it's generally stuff one of the team has put together, any of the information. So myself and Bryn and one or two other people can have a quick overview of what it is before they enter into any sort of perhaps discussions with landowners or agents or whoever it might be. So the second stage is the planning assessment. Now, this is where we're effectively looking for the potential for the site, but also the constraints for the site. Now, many people here will need, even at the early stages, some input from a planning consultant, or at least somebody that has reasonable knowledge of planning and preferably the planning in that local area. Now, we do not advocate that you always use people that are local, and again, we'll give those reasons why it's the right thing and why it's not the right thing when we do the individual session. But planning is something that the planning assessment is something that people really, really do need some input on, or most people need some input on. And if you can, you've got perhaps a planning consultant that you work with, as I say, or somebody that's knowledgeable, then it may be that you pay for their time in order to give some input on looking at sites, so we can effectively get to the know as soon as we can, which is another session in its own right. So the third one, and this is the one which most people start with, is the high level numbers. Now, and obviously putting them into the spreadsheet. This is the spreadsheet bit, if you like, and it's what most people do, even without doing many aspects of the initial assessment, and even before they get any guidance, any advice in terms of planning assessments, etc. So the areas that we look at in high level numbers, and if I'm being really, really frank, unless you're experienced, then you really haven't got a clue into a spreadsheet. So you may be getting a bit of support, a bit of guidance, a bit of input from other people. And as I say, we're going to talk very much about high level numbers and the ranges that we use, etc., to give you some guidance in those early ones, at a later date. But the areas that we look at for the high level numbers, and it is only these lines. Yeah, we look at the gross developed value, the GDV, as most people know what that is. We look at build costs. Now, that's build cost, that's the internal cost, the external cost, the cost, it's the total build cost. We look at developer contributions. Again, some people don't really understand the impact on developer that developer contributions has on a project, on the numbers. That it's not all negative by any means. Some of it is very, very positive, certainly when you start talking about affordable housing. We look at the professional fees, what they are likely to be, and all of these numbers, despite what people say, there will be a band of which they will normally fall in. So that actually, we always know that the professional fees will fall anywhere perhaps from 6% to perhaps 14%, but it's a massive band. So we need to understand on a given project, whether it's a conversion from a house into a HMO, whether it's an extension of a property and then conversion into perhaps some studios, whether it's a conversion of an office building into 40 apartments, whether it's new build for 1 unit or 100 units, all these things, all these lines need consideration. So then from the professional fees, we look at the finance costs, what the potential costs might be on a project that we are obviously appraising. And then we look at some profit. So we obviously, most people are in this for profit, for margin. So we put a range of profit numbers in there to see what impact it might have on the value. And lastly, the line, which is probably the most important line to an extent, is what the site is actually worth. We do not start with what somebody may be wanting. If it's something you're looking at online, we start at the GDV, and then the last line is what we think it is worth. Now, if that is anything like close to somebody's expectation or asking price, well, firstly, I'll be amazed. But if it is, all well and good. But that is what we're looking at. So in terms of the high level numbers, we are just looking at those 7 areas, and you need to have all of those 7 areas on your basic appraisal. Different people use different things. We have our own customized thing, and we obviously put our numbers in, but we'll explain, as I say, on separate sessions exactly what numbers we use. We don't mind putting that out there, and some of those numbers will be surprising. Some people will say, "Oh no, that's not possible," but we'll tell it how we actually see it. And last but not least, in the sort of 4 stages, and we get to a full development appraisal, the FDA, if there has been some traction in negotiation, and in some, being honest, probably shouldn't tell you this, but actually being honest, we often have secured the opportunity by this point before we do the full development appraisal, because it's generally secured on flexible terms. So again, another session for another day. You're fed up of hearing that, no doubt. So the full development appraisal, which is I don't know how many lines it is, how many rows it is on a spreadsheet. It's, I'm guessing 300, something like that. So all of the things we've spoken about before on the high level numbers are broken down into individual rows. So professional fees has got, number of rows, 20, 25 different professional type fees. And we look at each one of those when we come to the full development appraisal. So what else we look at in order to make those numbers, feel comfortable about those numbers, make them real, make them sort of deliverable, is so we look at what we call, or what Bryn's called, is the 9 pillars. So it's each area of the whole development process, if you like. So this is where narrative and opinion meets numbers. So again, this is something that you probably need to make some notes of if you're not aware of all of these, and you do need to look at every single one of these in a full development appraisal. It has to be given some consideration. So we always start off with, I think, what's commonly known as start with the end in mind. So we are looking at, the first thing is we are looking at the demand. So that's part of the end. What demand might there be for particular types of product, particular types of units, whether that be commercial, whether that be residential, whether that be, rooms for serviced accommodation or houses for multiple occupation, whether that's studios, 1 beds, 5 beds, whatever it might be. We are looking at what demand there might be, because we need to know that before we really can get into the scheme design, which is the next pillar. So the scheme design effectively is what is the demand telling us that we actually can produce a scheme around. So as an example, if you are in a city, a big town, etc., right in the middle, you're not going to build what we call townhouses, which are typically three-story houses. You're unlikely to actually have the site and the end value to actually do that. The demand for townhouses in the middle of the town would be probably phenomenal, but that is sort of contradicted by the fact that you're not going to end up with the value. So is there there a demand for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments typically? You know, in some areas right now, no, there isn't, because there's already too many. So we then look at planning. So what we've learned from our initial planning assessment, we will take that a little bit further in the full development appraisal, and we will start questioning you know, some of the constraints and some of the potential. We will start strategizing the planning process, and this is all, don't forget, this is all in the appraisal process. We don't wait until it's all there right now. What we will do this, and a lot of appraisals are reported, you know, they are, you know. So that's the third step. So the fourth step is we're going to look at the legals, and we need to do this in the appraisal. So, you know, what potential legal structure, what deal structures are we going to put into place? You know, how much is that actually going to, you know, how much is that going to actually be possible? So there's two bits come into one here. One is the legals, and one is the deal structure. So it's two areas, two pillars that are actually very, very close together. You can be very, very creative in your deal structure, and maybe that's legal, maybe that isn't, maybe it's proceedable, maybe there are funding issues, etc. So a lot of these 9 pillars, they start overlapping. Yeah, so it's almost like, which one do you get lined up before you decide the next one? Well, what you need to do is understand every single area of every single pillar, and then start putting it together. Yeah, and it's not a step-by-step process in that respect. The other thing that we will look at in anything is construction. You know, how are we going to procure the construction? Is it something we do in-house? Is it something we can partner up with a contractor? Is it something that we're going to go out and hire a main contractor? And if we are, under what sort of contracts are we going to use, etc.? So what construction methods might there be? Also, what construction challenges might there be? So we're looking at each one of these in relative detail in this appraisal. Yeah. So then we also got to look at funding. You know, so given an opportunity, what type of funding do we think is achievable for a given scheme, or we'll tend to be probably looking at 2 different schemes at the very least as we take it through an appraisal. Is the same funding available for each? So as an example, we might be looking at a scheme that is more suitable for building to hold, and a scheme that might be more suitable for sale. Well, we're going to look at those, and we're going to look at the funding implications of each on each appraisal. Another key area to consider, obviously, this is back to the numbers, is the costs. So we've already touched on that in terms of the high level numbers. Now looking at costs, you know, from the high level numbers and breaking that down. So the costs are only one of 9 pillars. Yeah, so that's why I sort of say that the costs are a very, very important part, but so are all the other 8. The number 8 effectively on our list, again, it's not in any particular order, is closely aligned to legals, which is the deal structure, as we've already mentioned. So I will repeat this because it's well worth it, and we will spend a lot of time talking about this when we do the session. Don't get too creative. You can write anything, can agree anything on paper, but it has to be legal. It has to be fundable. And you know, I know there's people that listen to us and we have dialogue with that are very creative. It's fantastic. We'll do a deal with a landowner. They'll chuck the land in. We'll do the building. And then they'll find they can't get it funded, or it's difficult to get funded. So we look at the deal structure and the legals. Really, really important. And then the last one on the list, which is also goes with the first one, is the exit. So closely linked to the demand is which demand fits which exit. So I mean, really, there's only 2 exits in a deal in you know, a very high level. You keep it or you sell it. You know, obviously, there's many sort of permutations over. You can keep some, you can sell some, you can keep some for a bit, then you can sell it. You know, you can sell at different stages. So lots of people, you know, look at, you know, the planning uplift sort of strategy, whereby, you know, they do a deal with an option or a promotion agreement or even a conditional purchase, and they then sell that on once they've obtained planning. And those of you that have ever heard me talk about this before, yeah, be very careful. And again, we're going to do a whole session, probably 2 sessions on that. And don't miss that if you follow that strategy, because, you know, too many people get burnt and you never hear about that. You just very rarely hear about it, or you don't hear the truth. So in sort of, you know, as a sort of, not quite finished yet, but as a sort of bit of a conclusion to that, you know, or sort of bringing it back all together, it's 4 stages: initial assessment, planning assessment, high level numbers, full development appraisal. Now, most of you, absolute guarantee, will not do the level that you need to do for a full development appraisal. And then when you are looking for investors and funding, you are going to struggle, because experienced investors, and most people are looking for investors at some point, experienced investors and experienced funders will be asking you questions of stuff you haven't thought about. They will be saying things like, okay, what exits have you looked at? Okay, so yeah, you're going to keep it, you might sell it, etc. Let's look at all your marketing reports, let's look at your rental valuations, yeah, and so you actually need all that. So you need to do that in the sort of marketing stuff in the exits, when you're considering the exits. I don't know what another example of what people don't do, I suppose, is right. Okay, look at cash flow. There's your costs. There's your spreadsheet. What's your projected cash flow? Those of you that are doing bigger projects, it's a phasing forecast and a cash flow considering to in conjunction with you know, with that phasing. What does it look like? Yeah, and then they'll be looking at things like, which we haven't mentioned here, but we will do, sensitivity analysis. So what happens, you know, pretty much on your numbers, if the gross developed value, which you might get from a marketing report, you know, well, what if it's 5% one way or 5% the other way? You know, so what that sort of brings us to is, within the numbers, within the spreadsheet, there isn't and shouldn't just be a single column. It should represent a range of numbers, because what you've got to think about, any of you watching this, listening to this, is how many costs of any project do you know that is the number it will be? Very, very few. What you can know is, oh, it will be between X and Y. Now, if the range is very, very big, then you need to go out, do a little bit more work on that to actually make that range smaller, or it becomes part of the offer. It becomes conditional. It becomes a variant on the offer. And again, loads more of that on a separate session, again, 1 or 2 sessions. So this is just the introduction. But we've already probably spent more time talking about it than some people do doing it. You know, I'm not kidding. So go back to going out there looking for investment and looking for funding. Now, there are fewer experienced investors than there are inexperienced investors, and this is where we see within the industry lots of investors getting drawn into and drawn in with inexperienced developers, because neither of them know the process. They do not know all of the ins and outs, and obviously some of those relationships don't end up you know, they end up being soured. They end up with more than that. I mean, courts and all sorts of stuff, and bad, you know. And my view is that most people aren't there to screw somebody over. They're just a little naive and a little innocent. And the biggest thing here is full development appraisals. We know loads of people that talk about due diligence, etc., etc. Very few people understand how to appraise a deal, because they do believe that it starts with the numbers. There's a few that then go a little bit further, and they look at the developer and they look at the the core team, etc., and they're starting to get on the right lines, and then they ask questions. So this due diligence thing that people do, it's a bit like a full development appraisal, because you should be asking questions on every area of those 9 pillars. Yeah, or you should be seeing or presenting information on every area of those 9 pillars when you are presenting an investment proposal And on the other side, if you're considering an investment, you should have something about every one of those. And so all of the things that we've talked about in terms of the initial assessment, the planning assessment, if you remember on the initial assessment, I talked about red lights. Yeah, we get stuff that is secured and on site. Yeah, it's got planning and everything else, and there are red lights. We will be giving examples of that, and people will say, nonsense, that can't happen. We got real life stories, we don't make them up, you know, and there are people that sometimes even watch us talk about it and think, yeah, they're talking about me. Yeah, and that isn't to sort of put anybody down. It's actually to prove to people, however experienced you think you are, and I've been doing this a long time, I learn stuff, yeah, pretty much every day, and I learn from people often a lot less experienced than me, but what I do, and I've not always been good at it, is I listen. Yeah, I can shut up long enough to listen. Yeah, I listen to people, don't always agree with them, but hey, you know, some people have a different opinion, and that sometimes that opinion is very, very valuable. So I don't know if any of you would admit to yourself that you've ever said, this is a good deal, I feel it's a good deal. I feel it, I know this is a good deal. Because I hear that lots and lots and lots. And very few times of when I've heard it, is it anything like the truth. Now, there are people that have been around and they know, and there's a couple of names just come through there on I know have been watching already. They know this, they understand this, right? Yes, if you've been doing something 20, 30, 40 years and you've been doing it with your own money and you understand what a deal is, yeah, then you can have a good hunch early on that this is a good one, you know. But you cannot do that. A recent experience of this is somebody that's telling me, I'm thinking that the market's going to sort of dip a little bit in this particular area, and they would refuse to believe that, and they know how I feel, so they say things like, I know that you won't believe it, but I'm fairly certain that this area, it's not like other areas. It is, you know, it's brilliant. I've talked to the agent, and the agent said it's brilliant. Well, of course they will. They're agents. They're going to, you know. So all this stuff about feel and gut and all that, forget it for most of you. If you go through initial assessment, planning assessment, high-level numbers, and then you're moving through to the full development appraisal, when you come out the other end of a full development appraisal, you start actually having a feel, because you will have looked at all of the risk areas. You will have answered questions that before you start this process you didn't even know those questions actually needed answering, because you did, you know, if you don't know the question, how do you know what the answer is going to be? So there are a few of us that can say, once we've done that, and some of us earlier in the process, yeah, I reckon this has got something. Yeah, now they're the people that have put their own money on the line and their own reputation on the line before, probably got it wrong on occasion, because that's how we understand how feelings work and how gut works. Yeah, when you've had the gut wrenching sort of feelings of things have gone wrong, that helps you focus later on when you're getting those false feelings of, oh no, it'll be all right, fantastic, it's a great area, yeah, we're going to build great quality, blah blah blah. Not disputing any of that, but please don't make decisions based on gut. When you've done this a few times, your gut will be very, very important. So, and we will talk about gut and gut feeling in a session. It won't all be about gut feeling, but it is going to be that. In conclusion to the introduction to appraisals, and that's been, I don't know, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and each one of these sessions is going to be between 15 and 30 minutes, and we're going to do 20 odd of them, yeah? So I don't know how many hours that is, but it's a lot, you know, it's 5, 6, 7 hours, and we're only still going to be scratching the surface. But what we're trying to do is give people that need to know some pretty basic, fundamental information that you can take and help you mitigate some of the risks in your investments or in your, you know, your endeavours to go out there and make a difference to the world. And we're all for that. We're all for supporting that. So what this actually is, so I think I probably put on the title there, appraisal is an art. It's not a science. Now, whether people that are sort of artistic, if you like, or art sort of tendencies or whatever, whether they're born with them or not, I don't really know. But this is an art. Yeah, it's not just a science, and that's really just to say, look, it's not just about the numbers. Don't get me wrong, the numbers have to work, but equally, the numbers have to be fairly flexible and still has to work. Now, you will do appraisals, high-level numbers, full development appraisals, and the numbers won't work. And everybody, I've done it myself, I'll play around with a spreadsheet until it does work. And then I can convince myself that we will get a higher end value. We will be able to trim the costs. No problem. We'll be able to get funding for less than that. Yeah, of course we will. And all of a sudden, you're really excited. You've got a deal on your desk. Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, the benefit of having somebody else look at your appraisal, your high level numbers, somebody that's going to give you some feedback, whether you like it or whether you don't like it. I do this, people do it, we do stuff. It's just because I put the number there doesn't mean to say it's not questionable. It often is, and they're sometimes right. I know this is being recorded, but I'm not always right. But I won't say it again. So in conclusion of the conclusion, appraisals are an art and not a science. There's some science in there, but it's an art, and it's understanding the whole process. And I will say again, most of you will never do it, and that doesn't mean to say you won't make some money out of projects, but you're going to have to be a bit luckier than those of us that do, because most appraisals end up in a no. Whether it's the initial assessment, the planning assessment, the high level numbers, or if we even go all the way to the full development appraisal, that can still end up in a no. But no, it's much better to say no, having spent a few quid, in order to spend some more, than it is be invested in a project by, from an appraisal process for us, internal costs for us to go through this whole thing, is anywhere 3,000, 5,000 and more before we really know, is it worth spending some more on? Is it worth investing some more on? So I hope we've got the point across that it is an art and not a science. So don't just look at the numbers, but when we do look at the numbers, let's look at them in a slightly different way. Let's not have a look at a single column of numbers. Let's have a look at a range of numbers, GDV, all the way through, build costs. If you think about it, the GDV, those houses are going to sell for 225,000. Well, it might sell for between 195 and 250, might they? And actually nobody knows. So that whole range gives us a greater feel for the project, and a lot of those numbers can then be worked into deal structures. And I'm going to finish by saying everything I've talked about tonight, every single one, we are going to be talking about in great detail, and I hope you stick with us, because it is to say, if you don't watch the rest of the 100 in 100 days, then the appraisal bit is the one that will either help you make some money, or even more important, stop you losing money as a developer, a would-be developer, a scaling developer, or as an investor in development project. So it's been Richard Little for Your Land Partner. I'll see you again. Thank you.